Joyful Christian Mystic Hermit. Well, a question has come up on the word of bilocating, and I wrote about it in a comment, but I might just talk about it a little bit. And also I'd written about eccentric, because the word eccentric came up, and a person was saying that they're working on it, that I'm becoming eccentric or something, in a good way. This person, recognizes that eccentric is a positive to be, but then said is working on it. But no, that person actually is. I can tell. I can tell when someone's eccentric, meaning outside the center, outside the circle of what is considered normal or basic or centered. And so I had this poem called Centering. Um, and it was from 1987. And I don't know what got me writing it. Well, God, the Holy Spirit did. But it's a type of words and stuff that I don't usually use, but it's called centering. I'd forgotten about it. But this talk about eccentric and stuff and my writing about it. Being eccentric is a positive, but it's nothing to try to be. Because you either are or you're not. Now, in that, you can expand, though. You can pray and expand the perspective. But innately, we are usually dockers or floaters. We're usually in the center, or centrists, or within the circle, the main group, or we're outside the center, outside the circle. And there's certain markers. Those who are outside have a different perspective. The view is broader, wider, more circumspect, outside the spectrum, can view from different sort of dimensions in a way, see different angles, can appreciate different viewpoints, such as even in the illegal immigrant thing, can grieve and love the people who came and understand why. Good people would break the law to come, desperate or wanting better pay or a nicer place to live, even for others, for their children, or to come and send money back. I've known some like that on the island. A lot of workers would come and live on the island, out in the woods and things, or together in a group, and they could avoid getting caught that way more being on the island. And they would work for not much. I knew a Hispanic man who was a legal immigrant years ago, came legally, but he hired a lot of them because he could get away with not paying them that much. And but they were always, in fear of being caught. But they came. One of them had well, he wasn't married to her, or maybe no, he wasn't married, but he was engaged. Had a little boy back home. So he was here trying to get money to send back to them so they could have a better life there. And he lived in like one room with 2 or 3 other guys at night with beds, or maybe even just slept on the floor. I don't know. But everything they'd earn, he would earn, he wanted to send back. So, I understand that. I see the perspective. I get it. It's still not the best situation, probably, I wouldn't think. But anyway, so this poem, Centering. In some sector or face of equilateral triangle, there is still very much a woman here. The surface is broad and goes deep into the center of quadrahedron. Although there is but one sector of all the facets that make me what I am, they are each necessary, or the shape would not withstand the pressures of the universe. However, energy is constantly involuting and then forcing outward. All of this fluctuating God energy keeps a pentagonal dodecahedron alive and eternal. So that's sort of a lot to absorb, I suppose. And I'm trying to sort of even go back in to that time period of where I was. I know felt very much a human, a woman, a person on this earth, female gender, and I was in a balance of a triangle. And even so, even in that sector or face of the equilateral triangle, I was still very much centered as a woman. I knew I was trying to find myself. And it says here, although there is but one sector of all the facets that make me what I am, this is for anyone really. There's just one sector of all the facets of what make any of us what we are. All those facets are each necessary, or the shape would not withstand the pressures of the universe. I think I'd had a vision of who I was, or who people are, who beings are, in terms of a shape, a geometric shape. That was what triggered this, expressing this out. It had happened, I think, in the night. I was having a lot of visions and things then. I'd even asked one night, what is the soul? What is a soul? And I was shown what our souls are. And I'll describe that later. And I have a different poem for it. So, however, though, energy is constantly involuting and then forcing outward. So, see, we need the shape to withstand the pressures, all of the facets that make us who we are as individuals take up a side, or more than, and then other people make up other sides of these shapes that that if we didn't have all of our facets, the facets that we are born with, that God gives us, and they're all unique to each individual. Not any one person has the same thumbprint or fingerprint. Not any one person has the exact same facets in sectors of shapes, and the pressures of the universe would not withstand, would be withstood if we didn't have facets in sectors. So, however, energy is constantly involuting, going inward, and then forcing outward at the same time as we're out there in the universe, our what makes us what we are, all these facets. All of this fluctuating God energy, it's the God energy that's constantly involuting and then convoluting, forcing outward, keeps the pentagonal dodecahedron alive and eternal. Well, pentagonal is 5-sided. Dodecahedron, I think that's 10-sided, I think. Alive and eternal. I have no clue why the pentagonal dodecahedron are in there. All this was coming into me in expression, so I can't tell you. It's a little bit beyond me. I mean, which doesn't take much, but just the words. I had geometry as a sophomore in high school, but we didn't get much beyond maybe octagonal. So, and nothing regarding energy or facets and spectrums or sectors and or that we are a face of an equilateral triangle. The triangle is, I know it's a very spiritual and religious shape. Like even the Egyptian pyramids, there's some reason for that shape. Huge things. It was powerful. And how they built them even is rather miraculous. So I don't know. Anyway, there's that centering. I think the whole point God was trying to tell me at that time, because I was on the fringe of so much spiritual was coming to me in the night, opening me up, and also during the day I was just being opened up to God in such a huge way that God wanted to remind me, stay centered, and appreciate all the facets of what makes you yourself, and that you're still very much a woman. You're not. At times I felt like I was fragmenting. All of the spiritual realm is so vast, and some of the things I was being shown were so otherworldly from the temporal here. But I was being expanded to be outside the center, because God knew I was capable of that. So he was stretching me, but yet reminding me, you're still very much a woman. Don't worry. Stay centered. You're a part of the equilateral triangle, but understand that I'm energy. God is energy. And the energy comes from the outside and also from within, out. So it's a powerful force. And but it keeps us alive and eternal. The God energy keeps the pentagonal dodecahedron alive and eternal. I'm going to have to look up those words again. But it's a 5, would it be a 5-sided, what a dodecahedron is. But it's some shape, it's some form that evidently, contains all aspects of who we are, or maybe all of humanity, or all of creation, nature included, and creatures maybe are included in the dodecahedron that God, through his energy, keeps alive and eternal. So there's that. Then I think I will do this one that, here, this is convolution. Well, I have involution. I'll do convolution first, because then I want to talk about bilocation and eccentricity and concentricity. Convolution. This was 1986, so this was maybe a year before the other. And I have one involution that was a year later. Okay. Sadness precludes the concept of time, when our man concept of time is looked upon from the reflection of the basin of mirrors. That basin containing the oils of anointment, we see that time is always present. There is no past or future. What may seem starting or ending points are just not so. Then thinking of initiation and wanting to be at point B or C or even Z just makes no difference, for it already is point Z and C and B and A. We are in the Alpha and the Omega. We are in it. So it doesn't matter. If to compare ourselves with anyone, or to think, I need to be further at some further point. It doesn't matter. If we are within the Alpha and the Omega, we're there. We're there. We're going to be okay. Relax and flow. Work with. Allow the rubber cone to be convoluted. Allow the energy to roll with that rubber cone in and through and poured out into that vastness through which all energy flows. Okay, so this is making more sense to me than when it even came out. What would that be? 40 years ago. Yeah, 40 years ago about. Because I'm not sure at what point in time in 1986. I think it was toward the end of it. So probably more like 39, yeah, 39 years ago or something. But, so this, this is where I think God was really speaking. Relax and flow. Work with, well, he was saying this other stuff, but this was like here and now instructions that I could really get. Relax and flow. Just relax. Work with. Allow the rubber cone to be convoluted. Well, the rubber cone, see, I think it was probably the night before this thing came, this poem came out, these words, I had prayed and asked, I just had asked God, what is the soul? Because I was being shown so many things spiritually that finally I don't know, well, I don't even know what a soul is. What is the soul actually? What is actually a soul? And he showed me. And he showed me everybody's souls from all time and place and future and past. And it was like a huge universe, endless, endless. And it was dark yet light at the same time. It was, and all of these rubber cones, they were, like just rubber cones. And the shorter point, they had like an opening in the end and an opening in the back, but they were rubber, like rubber material. And they were all just slowly suspended, all from all over space, from all directions, but heading toward a center. But slowly, just all of these millions, zillions of them, flowing, just flowing in space like. And as they would go slowly, they would be convoluting and involuting. The rubber cone would turn in and then come back out. But at the same time, it would just keep flowing. Just this peaceful, it was all silent, there was no noise. And they had light. You could see them, they were sort of glowing, but not anything crazy glow. It was very peaceful, very beautiful, a beautiful sight. And I was told these are souls. This is your soul. So I think evidently in God, what God can see of us is we are these cones, these rubber cones. And it's we're to allow the energy. They're constantly on their own. So we're to work with it and allow our souls to convolute and involute all the time, or convolute, to go inside out, but while they're still going forward. They just do a reversal, and they would go float a little and then do it again. Well, it's sort of like a metamorphosis in a way, but he was using that the soul is the example of that our souls constantly, what's the word he used? Convoluting, as we're at the same time gradually moving toward the center, where God, the energy force, and allow the energy, God is energy, to roll with that rubber cone in and through and poured out into that vastness through which all energy flows. So there was at the same time then energy flowing through the convoluting cone, as all of them, as they were gradually, just practically imperceptibly, but moving toward the center. And it was dark yet light, because all these cones had light. They had energy in them, God's energy, that was causing them to convolute, but yet to keep progressing at the same time. Over and over and over it was amazing. It was an amazing sight. I can see it now just as clearly as I saw it then, 39 and a half years or more ago. And that's the soul and all the souls. And they're all there, and it's all that energy that is created with the souls. God has the souls also as part of the energy. We're not to interfere with that. We're to allow God's energy to roll with the rubber cones that are convoluting and moving in, and the energy is moving in and through and poured out into the vastness which all energy flows. So we all are doing this with each other too. We're part of God's energy, and through our transforming, convoluting, as we keep moving toward God, closer and closer to the center of all beingness and energy and source, God, that we are participating with, but also helping with others. We're helping to move the energy of God in others. That's our relationship with all these other souls. Past, present, future. There is no past, present, and future in God. But at that point in time, all that had been, that will be, and were right then, all the souls, I could see them all. I mean, it was too vast to see all, but I got the idea that it was infinite of these rubber cones. So our souls are maybe not rubber specifically, but they're like that. They're very pliable. Our souls are. And they can turn inside out, and they're constantly in movement. Slow, gradual, and we are to relax and flow, work with our soul to be convoluted, to be altered, to be transformed over and over, to be turned inside out while we keep going, to be changed and improved, and more energy gets through that way, to keep the energy flowing and moving around the whole universe and in other souls too. It expands God. We actually expand the energy of God by cooperating with our souls, with others, and with God, and to keep moving. And this is, I'm in this odd, very strange period of time now, and of where I feel I have no impetus. But I know from being reminded of this that my soul is still very much moving. It still has lots of energy flowing through it, and then being convoluted, and more energy moves and affecting all the other souls. And I think having internet and cyberspace sort of helps us. This was before we had any of that, but it helps maybe with the conception of it. So I'll save involution for another time. But eccentric is outside. So I suppose I was shown that and other things because God knows that He gave me facets that to be outside the center, outside the circle, to be able to perceive things more and to grasp, even though I don't totally grasp. But and I'm not hung up into things either. Anyway, it's just interesting. And it's a beautiful kind of a situation of a growth, of a flowing and energy, and the soul to understand what it is, and to keep flowing and going and growing and living life, the spiritual. So here's this word bilocate then that's come up. And somebody had mentioned that friends in the past had said, the person was so busy, very active person, engaged in life, and said, oh, you'd be the kind to bilocate, to be at two places at once. Well, that was more of a temporal use of the word, or a temporal understanding that the person just had so much energy and loved different activities. But in actuality, that is a more central kind of a view of the word bilocate. And also be more of concentric as opposed to eccentric, outside the circle. But it depends on the ability for the person to perceive. Someone who's outside the circle, an eccentric type person, has quite a broad view, perspective. Just think, if you're out, if here's a circle and you exist outside the circle, think of the view you have. A vast view, a vast understanding. It's like the floater floating down the river, and the people on the land going along the river, as the little boat floats by with the floaters on it. They see the whole expanse of the river, both sides as they go down. And they saw where they came from, where they are, and where they're going. They just see the whole length. They see as they go. Perspective, broad. The dockers who are on land can see the person next to them and the person to this side. And if it's not too wide, they can see across the way. But here comes someone floating along and they think, what on earth is this person doing out there? That's weird. That's strange, You're supposed to be on the ground, looking out and seeing what comes into your vision, your view, which is like this. You can see that much. But if you're outside a circle, or if you're a floater, you see the whole expanse. So that's the difference between eccentric and centric. In the center, in the circle, in the group. And it's great to be in a group if that's where God places you. If that's your temperament, your instinct, your comfort zone, how you're made. The facets that you have in your sector are of that type, that you flourish in the circle or on land. But then there are those who are outside the circle, and to the ones within, they seem rather strange. And that's, well, how we get the negative connotation for eccentric people, because they have a view, a perspective, that the majority of people who are in the center, who are secure in the center, they don't see outside. They don't have to. There's no reason to have to see outside the center. They will if they need to, but there's a place for those in the center. Circles are necessary. Circles are okay. But if you're not of that disposition, and you are comfortable being outside the circle, outside the center, eccentric, out center, then that's the place for you to be. And when you are, though, it's not a negative. I'm trying to make people who've been called eccentric, like me, to realize it's okay. It's a blessing to be who we are. So to be eccentric, my grandson called me Gaga from 8 months on. He didn't know what it meant. It's outside the center. It's one of those words that means off kilter, atypical, a little bit offbeat, definitely offbeat, not just a little, but okay. So eccentric people see a broad perspective, a vista. There's nothing wrong with that. And they live accordingly. They don't have They don't have a need to be as others are, but they don't mind eccentrics as they are. It's a very peaceful, rest and flow. It's that type of thing. It's a rest and a flow. Those in the center in our society are esteemed because the most of people are in the center. They're very functional. We're giving another example of what I call them dockers and floaters, but we call them centrists and eccentrics. This all came up. Somebody asked about it, and in popped Reverend Monsignor in the confessional. All of a sudden one morning, it was after you saved the church. I'd helped them out through God's using me supernaturally, through supernatural gifts. I had helped with something, well, several things. But the one thing was something that they could have been in steep trouble and sued, or who knows, it would have been bad for the church. Obviously, it was a bad thing. But somehow I was in confession, and Reverend Monsignor looked at me all of a sudden. I would always kneel in confession. I'd be down child pose because my back was so bad. It wasn't because I thought it was more holy to kneel. It was out of back comfort. But I was down there on the floor, he was a big, tall guy. And all of a sudden he just stares at me, goes, "You're non-conventional." And he was just like, it just dawned on him that I was unconventional. I wanted to say, "Do you think?" Because that was sort of pop trendy there. "Do you think?" But yeah, I thought, oh my goodness, you're just realizing that I'm non-conventional. And he didn't use the word eccentric then. I think he used it another time, though. But he is the opposite of that. He is so centered, everything in its place, and a place for everything. And even though he came to understand at a certain level, that I knew things, because the bishop got it, sort of, because the priest told him, well, she knew through supernatural means that it does have these gifts, And while it was hard and they hadn't met someone like that, they could comprehend it. But then after a while, it was probably another year or something, or 6 months even, didn't take too long, where it got too much for them. And they had to flee. They couldn't take it. It was beyond their center, their comfort center, centered, solid facets. Their facets only went so far. And it became too much, and it actually turned out, and then he also had said, because he couldn't understand also, and this bothered him a lot when he said, "You're non-conventional," and he says, "and you're always in swirls of controversy. Why is it you're always in swirls of controversy?" Well, I'd like to know that, it's obvious why. If God is showing you things that have to be cleared up, the people who are doing wrong things don't like that. Yet, am I going to tell God, "No, I'm not going to deal with this. You're showing me these awful things, but I'm going to it could be someone cheating, like misusing funds in a parish, or it was all had stuff to do with the church, or people who had gotten misled and a priest was just letting them, go off the deep end in something that even a group in another state were doing that was so warped, getting into new age stuff and then taking advantage of people, causing them to lose money. It got very involved. It was a very nefarious. It wasn't good. It wasn't from God. It was demonic. But, then I knew of it. This man in Mass, Hispanic man who usually wasn't at the cathedral daily mass, but he was there, and something told him, he says, God told me, I need to talk with you. And after he told me, I thought, well, God did tell him. He says, God said, you'll help. You'll do something about this. And he told me what was going on with the Hispanic people in his parish. And one man had risen up sort of as a leader, a spiritual guide to them, who wasn't qualified, but he got them hooked up with this group in Ohio, another Hispanic group that was doing bad things, and taking them way off the deep end into a spirituality that was very appealing to the Hispanic people, because it included a lot of spiritual stuff, but it wasn't of God. It wasn't real. It was false. It was demonic. And this man recognized that it was bad, but he was helpless to do anything about it. And I think God must have told him. I'd never met him before. He had not been there before. And I was back a couple of pews. And somehow, right after Mass, he beelined for me. He says, I need your help. You're the one I'm supposed to come to. I know it. And God told me during Mass, It was freaky, but, I got to know him a little bit and talked to him on the phone a few times and found out a little bit more what was going on at this church that had the largest Hispanic population. And he didn't know that I was involved with anything else in the parishes that I had to deal with the bishop with and stuff, or this Reverend Monsignor. So I went to I called him about it, because he's the vicar general and he's over the priests of all the parishes. I thought he would want to talk to the priest and say, Hispanic people are into something that's very bad for them. Please give them more guidance and get them out of that. Don't tell them not to go over to Ohio. They were spending money. They didn't have money. Money they didn't have. This man was concerned about that, and the women in particular. But this spiritual supposed leader in that parish it was Lent, and he was asking extreme things of people. They were not to eat. What was it? Including women. He said many of the women were pregnant, but they believed this guy because they thought that he was, really holy, and because he was taking them over there where they were having these false apparitions. And Reverend Monsignor had heard about the false apparitions in this other diocese in another state. He'd heard about it. And that bishop was having trouble squelching it. He had already put a condemnation on it, that no Catholic was to go. But these people from our diocese were still going. And a few from the other bishop's diocese, Archbishop it's a big diocese, were also sneaking and going to it, even though they'd been told to stay clear of it, that it was not safe, it was not holy, it was a sham. It was demonic. Because unusual things can happen with the demonic. That's, how heads can turn and stuff, and people can walk upside down on ceilings, and devil possession and stuff. The devil can create unusual things to happen. But it's not of God. There's always a means to know that if you're in tune. But these people weren't. So this man was worried. His wife was pregnant. And they were told to, I forget, it was some really rigid thing. No meat, no milk, no vegetables. I think they had to just eat bread. And only like once a day, and not every day. An extreme fast during Lent. Or they said, all these bad things were going to happen if they didn't. It was one of these threat kinds of, totally not of God. But the people were buying it, the Hispanic people in this parish. It's a group of Hispanic people. They had their own little subculture, which can happen. I don't blame them. And many of them didn't speak English. So, but this man did, and he was worried, and he couldn't even get his own wife to eat right. And he was so worried about his child that was going to be born, malnutrition and all, or maybe even deformed. She was early on in her pregnancy. And so I tried to get Reverend Monsignor. I said, can't you even call the priest? You're in charge of priests. And tell him to step in and monitor this man. I had his name and everything. The man who was being the leader of their Hispanic group, and getting him involved with the Ohio thing, but also giving himself these orders. And the people followed him like the Pied Piper, trusted him, and were taken up because they thought he had special powers and was a spiritual mystic or saint or whatever, And it was just terrible. But Reverend, well, what do you expect me to do? I said, well, pick up the phone and call. At least call, or call the priest in and explain what's going on. He doesn't realize what's happening in his parish with his Hispanic population and this dangerous fast that these people are following, even the pregnant women. And so I don't know if he ever did, if he was just... I had to tell the man, I said, I've done everything I can. We've got to just pray. And then I think, was that the year that might have been the year that I had the bad neck injury then at Mass. Because it's right at the beginning of Lent. And that neck injury was like the first Friday of that Lent. So I think I was home then, out. Even Father Vincent couldn't locate. He had just met me, and he knew that I'd been injured, and he heard them talk about me. He heard Reverend Monsignor and the other priests talk about me in the rectory, and knew that they were not for me, that they were really put out. And I'd called asking for communion, and no. And he knew, but he knew to be very careful. Father Vincent did. So he couldn't come right out and ask, where is this person? Where does she live? What's her phone number? Finally, he found remembered a person who used to talk to me and was able to ask them. And they were able to give him my phone number then. Another parishioner, my good friend Kate. And he figured out a means, but took him like 2 weeks to work out a way that he could safely for himself. Yeah, and I said, you did the right thing to, because there was a lot of devil involved in everything going on. And yes, I was in swirls of controversy, not because I wanted to be, obviously, but when somebody comes with you with stuff like that, you can't just sit on it. You have to try to get them help. So I went to the person who should have been able to help. And I hope he did, I don't know. And I had no further contact with the man. We didn't have cell phones that that the numbers would show up. So they were the real old and still landlines then. So anyway, being eccentric is okay. It's just how you are. But some people don't stand out as eccentric outside the circle. God gives them a cover, like a career or a family. I did much better when I was married. The having a husband normalized my eccentricity. He didn't like it. I didn't know he didn't, unless he was just using that as another excuse to leave, rather than to admit himself that he had issues, womanizing issues. But and also having children, that crimped his style. It definitely did. So, but we can't control what other people do or what they think. But like my husband was definitely in the center. He was a centrist. concentric person. And that's good. I mean, they're salt of the earth. We need all. And it's the majority. My kids they've got common sense. But God has put me in a position where I can just be full-blown myself. Not just here, but basically now when I'm out with others on the rare occasions, had to go get a gift card for the fiance-in-law or whatever I'd call him for his birthday, and normal transaction, etc. Bank, normal transactions. But I can be my full self here. God has given me the means. Pain. In fact, he told me, use pain. That's my cover. Whereas this other person has art. She's an artist. And a lot of fine artists, a lot of people have a perception of artists already, highly creative, live a different life than the norm, outside the center a little bit already, but very successful artist, so very esteemed, accepted, very social, nothing weird, which, I'm not weird. You may disagree. Reverend Monsignor did. He thought I was weird. Non-conventional. That to him, that was bad. That wasn't a good thing. Non-conventional. Eccentric, i.e. eccentric, not good. Because it was something he could not see. A lot of times people who are in the center, they have a lot of work to do in the center, in the here and now, in the temporal, practical, functional. And their vista, their vision, their perception is not broad. It can't be. Too many people in the way, But that's where they are placed by God. So it works well. They love being in there with the people. Somebody else said, well, basically he's an introvert, but makes himself be socialized in order to do the type of volunteer work he's doing and stuff, but needs time, alone time. Well, yes, I haven't had a chance to write back, but I call it being overpeopled. You get someone who's outside the center and they get overpeopled, and it's not a good scene. You can lose it. There's another contributor, viewer, who wrote, and I want to go over what she wrote because it's so deep and it's so good and it's helpful in a spiritual life way. Very helpful. Was to me, it will be to you. Very wise, a very wise person. And in fact, there's a couple of them, but this one, just the way she expressed it all would be good to share or talk about. But that person says she's an introvert. And now I never thought of myself as an introvert. But I was always very content playing by myself. I could get absorbed in things. I could contemplate early on. And it was natural to me. I didn't know any of it, but I was very content, could cope with that. But I would get frustrated, like within my family unit. I needed more outlet, more activity, an outlet, not necessarily with people, but just activity. And sitting around watching TV didn't cut it for me. But I did it just to have access to my dad and my mom, just to be there with them. And especially with my dad, who I didn't see much. I felt that was important, to bond in some way. But it wasn't of interest, other than I did like mysteries, because they take you out more. You have to use your perspective and your senses to try to figure out, the mystery. So that was okay, watching Perry Mason. And I was reading Perry Mason like when I was 4th and 5th grade. Nancy Drew, I was done with by 1st grade. I read through all of them, maybe 2nd grade, and then I needed something more. Or third grade, I think. But definitely by 4th grade and 5th and 6th, I was reading Perry Mason novels, which the librarian complained and refused to let me check out. And my mom put her foot down and said she can read those all she wants. She likes it. So good for my mom, sticking up for me on that. But the lady thought it was inappropriate, too dark for a young child. But I was always very interested in death, always fascinated by death. But see, that's outside the circle, outside the norm for a little kid. Even at age 4, I had a fit. They wouldn't let me go to the funeral home to see the great grandfather who had died in his coffin. I was just had a need to say goodbye in that way, and they didn't understand, and I was too young to express it other than to cry and beg. And they did what they felt was the right thing and refused it of me, which they shouldn't have. But, I coped with it. I probably, played more in the basement or, went out in some creative, imaginative other world and read more books or something so to get away, to have some kind of a life. And that's why God has put me in this position. Today I've been on Corfu. I was just starting to listen to the Vivaldi's Juditha, his music dedicated, and it involves one of the miracles of Saint Spiridon. I'd been pronouncing it wrong. It's Spiridon. And I've prayed again to Saint Spiridon to please help my family and to help me get through this, whatever I'm in. Again today I thought, am I depressed? But no, I think I'm just tired. I'm so tired. And I'm not plugged in with doing stuff. I just want to be absorbed in God. And I need to do, just the basics at least, which I'm doing, but barely. And I'm tired and I'm in so much pain. So I don't know. It might be time that I am going to be more bedridden. Maybe the arachnoiditis is at that point, and I just don't have it to fight it. And God isn't giving me the oomph to fight it. I'm asking for the oomph. Praying for that. Ask St. Spiridon to get me the oomph to build back up. But unless God doesn't want that. So, and he might not. I don't know. In my perspective, being outside the center, where you can see and see and see, it's within the realm of certainly of possibilities that God wants me in bed and to decline. That's you got to die of something, and it can take a long time if you decline. But I don't want to mentally, really, in some ways, but I can't seem to push through myself. So I need otherworldly help if it's going to come. If it's God's will, it will come. If not, it won't. But I'll keep trying, but I'm not having any success. But being eccentric is just a status of what facets you have and how they're configured in what spectrum. And you're in the spectrum that's outside the center, and others are in the spectrum that's in the center, in the circle. They're both good. They're both great. The one has most because that functions best. You don't need that many eccentrics. But definitely people can become more broadened out with their perspective by paying attention to eccentricity. But I think it's another one of those things that, unless God does it with you and has you become outside the center through some situation that happens to you in life where you are very altered, then I could see. But it's not of our own volition that we just become more eccentric or we become eccentric. It's more the actuality is that we start recognizing that's what we really are, and that we have the freedom. We have more freedom to be that, to become, to let it out. And definitely with my hermit life and my stopping the struggle to feel like I had to interact with parishes or interact with Mass or with people to fulfill other people's sense of she's okay or isn't this good, especially like after my mother passed. And I didn't have to try to please or to reassure her that I was okay the way I was. She had already sort of figured, I had worn the gray jumper for several years, and she says, well, I guess you're okay with it, or you seem to be doing okay looking like that, wearing that outfit. And I was. I didn't realize that other people were viewing me as a religious or else just as someone very, very strange. The bishop thought I was a street person, an incompetent type, a mentally incompetent. And that's a nice. And well, what do you do? I like going to Mass. And I said I used to be an educator. I used to have a career. I could tell he didn't really believe it. How could this imbecile? We were out in the cold going into the chapel, and he saw me, and of course I had my old gray wool coat on from Goodwill and stuff, and it was a snowstorm. My car engine had blown up, so I had to take the bus to get to Mass when it was that cold, because it was too far to walk in that freezing cold. And so I got off the bus, and of course that looked like more, a street person or, an indigent or something. And I had a big wool sock hat that my son had given me that he didn't need because it kept my head warm. And that looked probably dumb, but on an older woman. I was in my 50s then. And I said, yes, in education. Yes, I'm sure. I said, well, yes, I've been to college, because I thought, well, I don't want to lead him on, poor guy. He was 80 then or something, or 78. I said, well, yeah, I've been to college. I have advanced degree. Oh, you do? Because he asked my name again. So then I said, Dr. So-and-so. Because I thought, well, I'll use my title, my professional title, because I have a doctorate. And, doctor, well, doctor what? I said, well, education. And he goes, oh, that's a very high degree. And I said, yes, and he says, well, what I said, well, USC. That's an important school. Well, how did you hear of that one? He still thought I was an imbecile. And I don't think he ever thought otherwise until, must have been, that was think of a Friday morning, and by Sunday evening Mass, my dad told me, you've got to straighten things out now. It was time to report the priest that had big issues. So he says, you need to straighten it out with this. It was the Reverend Monsignor had the Mass. So after the Mass, I said, well, I need to talk with you. And he too thought I was somebody else. It's just a pathetic situation. He thought I was this woman from my hometown who was deformed at birth, but also had fallen. She was a teacher, had fallen, broke her neck, so she was extra deformed. She was very, very short then. It was like it cut her in half, practically had to have surgeries and stuff. But she had hair that she wore. If she'd had a different haircut, it would have helped her out. But I'm on it, you shouldn't have to change how you look just to please other people. But it frizzed out. It was real long, and I think to cover her neck that was pretty much gone. But it did give a different look for her. But it ended up that I finally, had to say, and I took in my binder, I took in my resume, I took photos and things, I took in my diploma from USC, I took that in, had an appointment with Reverend Monsignor to prove that I wasn't this street person, and finally it got straightened out. But I wrote a letter and I said, it isn't very nice that you put all this awful stuff on this nice lady from my hometown who's disabled and all misshapen. Because they were convinced I was her. So I just said, no, I am me and that is she. And I'm who I say I am. And anyway, it got worked out eventually. Because then, see, I had to prove that I wasn't this imbecile that they saw on the street and thought that I was this woman who they thought was goofy from my hometown. But she did act. She went outside the center in a forced way. This other lady did from my hometown, and got way carried away with supernatural stuff. And it made her seem even more goofy to the people in the town, even in the hometown. So I don't blame them for sort of thinking that I was that person, and based on the rumors, and that I was an imbecile from the streets and stuff. So, but it all got straightened out eventually. It got straightened out. And I felt sorry for this lovely woman who had such a debilitating kind of injury. But it's a good reminder, don't get carried away with the supernatural. Don't force it, in other words. Don't try to make yourself into what you're not and get carried away. This woman, she just genuinely got excited about any latest apparition sight. She would go gonzo. Even the ones that were disproved, she would still be convinced that they were real. Bless her heart. So anyway, that's a little bit about eccentric and concentric, and if you're given a cover and you're eccentric, use it like I do. I'm here. I don't need to hide, but I don't need to be out there either. And so I don't have to put on anything. I don't have to fake anyway or try to be more normal acting. I don't act otherwise. But I might come off as eccentric with just the topics I talk about. That could be. But it doesn't matter. I'm here, anonymous. None of my neighbors think anything. I don't go into any spiritual stuff with other people. That's what this is for. So, but I think Lovey is saying it's supper time. He wants me to fix supper. So I will talk about bilocation another time. But eccentricity, being unconventional, being a nonconformist, those are sort of negative terms, depending on how they're used. There's Lovey, you're going to get your supper. Come on. Mercy's on top of me. I can't get up. Come here, Lovey. Mercy's getting off. She wants supper too. Lovey will come in here pretty soon. Yep, here he comes to get me. Get supper, old lady. Get supper. So, okay, anyway, that's it. But I'm glad to have rediscovered those poems because they make more sense to me now. A lot more sense, and it fits in with that vision of when I asked what is the soul? What does it do? What does it look like? What is it? And it's this form, this rubber that God utilizes to flow energy through. We have energy in us, and we just keep convoluting and moving toward God, the source. And Some moved a little faster than others. So I would say don't resist God. That would be sort of a no-brainer. He said rest, flow, flow with, cooperate, in other words. Don't hold back. Don't try to think it through too much or resist. Don't get too involved, especially if you're an eccentric. And especially if you have a great cover, like being an artist or a musician, or even, I suppose, a psychologist could fly, with, because they're expected to have theories and get deep into the psyche and stuff. And then of course people in religious life, except if you're in a convent. I think the convents are going to peter out, except for the active ones, like the Daughters of St. Paul. They'll last longer or even forever, maybe because people are doing active works of mercy and good, evangelizing. They're evangelizing the world through books and through documentary videos and film and all kinds, and computer, all kinds of modern media. So they're doing something that is proactive, and something that the centrist people in the circle, in the center, need and want. It's their language. And in fact, I like reading. I mean, I can't, my brain isn't, the arachnoiditis has affected that, but I have liked reading. I learned so much reading. I still want to try to read more and more. I just read little bits. I'd have to take notes if I wanted to try to retain anything. But see, that's something for me to understand as an eccentric, outside the circle, outside the center, is that even if I'm reading and it's going in, it's in. Whether or not I externally remember shouldn't matter at all to me. That's just sort of an ego thing, or ego not in a prideful thing, but in a temporal, my mind can recall something. It's just a temporal kind of a thing that doesn't matter. As long as it's in me, that's what matters. As long as I've read it and it made connection in my soul to help my convolutions, to help me flow toward the center, convoluting all the time, the rubber cone. We are sort of rubbery, our physical bodies are. So the older you get, the less your skin is rubbery, but it stretches still. So, just joking. God bless his real presence in us, and I'd better get the supper started for the animals. Later on bilocation.